Hi again then guys, and welcome once again to a specific showcase, if you will, or review of a specific car from the Test Drive Unlimited franchise, and this time, as many of you know, it's one of my favourites. It's one of my favourite cars from the first game, it's one of my favourite cars in the real world as well, the Maserati MC12. Carrying on of course from last week, where we took another look in the first test drive game at another Maserati, but a completely different one, total opposite end of the spectrum. We've gone from the oldest and slowest Maserati in the game to basically the newest and the fastest. We discussed the 3500 GT, which is a gorgeous classic, great collector's piece, and so few games feature it that it really does feel like a unicorn. The MC12, in a funny kind of way, almost seems similar, because there aren't that many games, if you really think about it, to feature the MC12. The main ones are Test Drive 1, and of course the Forza franchise, and most of the Forza games have it. Whereas, apart from that, if you really think about it, there aren't a huge amount of games that feature it. Even if you think of a game or a franchise which you would assume would have it, like Project Gotham, it doesn't. As far as I'm aware, none of the Project Gotham games have the MC12, and I may be wrong, but I don't think they do. And yet here, Test Drive Unlimited 1 proudly showcases the car. It's expensive, for sure. It's a 750,000 credit car, or dollar car, whatever you want to refer to it as. And of course, for those who are perhaps unaware, which isn't many people, it's based on the Enzo underneath. It has the same windshield, the same chassis, the same engine, even the same steering wheel. But of course, the engine is a lower state of tune. Instead of the roughly 660 horsepower that the Enzo has, this one's got closer to 625, 630. The torque is a little bit lower, but neither of them are overly torquey. 480 pound-feet is more than enough for a big Italian V12. It sounds fantastic, just like the Enzo does, and the weight is lower than the Enzo, 1,335 kilos. That's very good. To put that into perspective, that's about 25 kilos less than a Gunpla Apollo. So, pretty remarkable, actually. Now, one of the best things about the MC12 is its track potential. And this is where it differs from the Enzo, and I believe I have touched on this before. The Enzo is a far more copious car in terms of its production run. They built about 400 of them, they only built about 50 MC12s. That immediately makes it a more exclusive car. The MC12 was also more expensive by about 40 grand. It's also more expensive used than the Enzo is. And yet, the Enzo is a more powerful and a faster car. But here's the catch. The Enzo is only faster in a straight line. Around a track, the MC12 is a superior machine, and it's because of the intended purpose and how they achieve that purpose. Because with the Enzo, it uses a lot of F1 tech. It was one of the most technically advanced supercars of the time, one of the reasons why it's still such a good car, even by today's standards. But the difference was it used F1 tech and filtered it down to the road. Whereas the MC12 is a completely different animal. It uses the same soul, if you will, the same heart beating underneath the body, but instead of having this F1 tech for the road, they did the exact opposite thing. They built a homologation car, a car which they had the full intent of going racing with. Whereas with the Enzo, that didn't really happen. Ultimately, it became the FXX, of course, but even that isn't a race car, technically. It's a club sport test bed for really rich owners. The MC12 went racing, and it was a force to be reckoned with alongside stuff like the Celine S7R race car as well, and various others. But the funny thing is, the aerodynamic efficiency of the MC12 with the longer rear deck, it's around a foot longer than the Enzo, the massive rear wing, and just more of a focus on cornering rather than straight line performance means that around the Nordschleife, for instance, when Evo magazine tested it, the MC12 was faster than the Enzo, because it's not just about straight line performance. And this is something which I've talked about on Test Drive before, because a lot of the game is based around straight line performance. And that's one of the only disadvantages of the Test Drive franchise. You basically win in whatever car has the best top speed, as a general rule. Even on technical circuits, you will often find the car with top speed will win, and that's why you more often than not find that stuff like the Enzo or the Koenigsegg's, or on the second game stuff like the Bugattis, or of course the McLaren F1 as a perfect example, will win the race. Now in the case of something like the McLaren, it has both. It has the handling and the straight line speed, but even if a car doesn't have good handling, or at least not quite as good, it will still often do very well. The Koenigseggs, for instance, are more challenging, but they're very difficult to beat because of how overwhelmingly fast they are, especially when you upgrade them. With the MC12, that's not really the case, and in a funny kind of way, I would actually say a very similar thing about this MC12 to what I said about the 3500 GT last week, and that is, buy the car and use the car for racing if you want to, but the best way to experience this is not necessarily to race it, at least not on this game. On games like Forza, where it's actual technical circuit racing, then you can enjoy the benefits of a car like this. But on any kind of open world game, be it Forza Horizon, or this one, Test Drive Unlimited, it's just not that kind of car. In a similar way again to the Ascari A10, which I discussed on Test Drive 2. So then, it's a car that I would recommend having if you're a fan of it. It's a car that's just fantastic to drive. I think it looks incredible. I know a lot of you guys do as well. There are some people who think that the MC12 isn't a very good looking car. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I can't understand that way of thinking, to be honest. I think it's one of the best looking cars ever made, easily. And certainly has one of the most iconic paint schemes of any supercar. And it's one of those supercars which doesn't just talk the talk. It really does back it up with performance. It has incredible handling. The top speed's not as quick, as I said, as the Enzo. It's like 205 instead of about 218. But the 0 to 60 time isn't far off. It's still around 3.6 seconds. The handling is even better, as we already said. The brakes are very good. And it's a pleasure to work with. Is it expensive? For sure. Is it worth it? To the right person, definitely. To most people, if you're not specifically a fan of Maserati, or even more so the MC12, then I would say you could probably give it a miss and just go for the Enzo, because the Enzo offers a similar package, but it's even quicker, especially for top speed. And I used to use the Enzo a lot on the first game. It was a very, very good car. One of the best in the game, actually, all round. But this one was always my favourite in the game, and still is, because it's just more fun, I think. So overall, certainly worth checking out, and it's such a shame that so few games feature it, and even more of a shame that Test Drive 2 doesn't feature the car. But gorgeous machine, one of my favourites, always has been, so certainly worth checking out. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.